So thank you so much for joining our training session today. Of course, we're here to discuss the LabSim report data. I appreciate your attendance in being here so that we can review this information because, of course, this is important detail for instructors. If you already have your classes set up, students are registered in those classes or enrolled and they're now doing some work, you want to be able to see what's available. And many of you may have already done that. So again, we do have the question box. You can ask questions anytime during the presentation. Let me point out one thing to get started here. And this is an important part. If you do use LabSim via an LMS integration through Blackboard, D2L, Canvas, Moodle, there's others out there as well, report data may automatically be returned to your management system already. So obviously today I'm going to review what report data is in specifically LabSim. So keep this in mind. This may apply differently. But even if you're using LMS integration, you can still always come into LabSim and look at report data. I've already mentioned this, but for anybody who just joined us, again, I want to make sure that you know, please ask questions anytime during the presentation and use the question box that's available to do that. Here's our outline of what we're going to cover today. I'm first going to go in and talk about the default report data, which includes, we're going to look at the class gradebook, individual scores by product, and then talk about the certification practice exam scores. Then the second part, we're going to go into the custom report data and how you can create your own custom reports in LabSim. So I've already logged into my instructor account, and you can see I have multiple classes set up here. Now, first off, sometimes it surprises me a little bit, but I want to make sure everybody is aware that to get to the reports, you will simply click the word reports on the far right. I've had instructors confused by this, thinking that they needed to go somewhere different, but it's right on the home page. And the word reports is a hot link. So you simply click the word reports, and then it will open up into a grouping of different report options that you can, of course, look up for this respective class. So if you do have multiple classes, obviously, then each class will have its own separate report data. The first one we're going to look at here today is our class gradebook. This will show a great snapshot of how the whole group is doing. Now, there's two ways to access this. Of course, I could click Run on the far right here, but I can also click the name of this report because it's also a hot link. So from here, I'm going to go out and now provide information here on this is a sample of what information you would see up front in a class gradebook. We have exams that are available, and of course also lab scores that are available, because these are the two graded items in our program. It's assuming that you want to see how students are doing on those graded activities. So here, of course, the column header identifies which activity is which here. And as you can see, we have one score posted for the students who have completed activities. The score that's listed here is always going to be the highest score. So the best score is what you see here. And of course, it doesn't matter, the other thing I should add to this, it doesn't matter how many attempts the students have made or which attempt is the best, this is always going to provide their highest score. So from here, we have other options that we can utilize. We can look at anything at the top, and these are parameters that you have the ability to adjust to help hone in on specific information, for instance, that you want. Let's say I just want to see how students did in Chapter 1 on their lab exercises only. Well, as I select that option, the report auto refreshes that data for me, and now I can see that I have only lab exercises, obviously, that are applying to Chapter 1. One thing I want to point out, if anybody has, and I know a lot of instructors have specific due dates that assignments are supposed to be turned in by. And sometimes there's a confusion like, well, how do I even, you don't set due dates in LabSim activities, but you can look up that information via the date range here. So if I were to say, you know what, I want to see how students did from the beginning of, or what they've done so far from the beginning of the semester, just going to pick the 20th here until today's date, which is, of course, the 29th. Now, I don't have any actual data that fits this criteria, but I'm simply pointing out to those of you who do have specific time periods that you want assignments turned in by. If you have a Friday due date for something, you can always put the beginning of your semester in always as the start date, and then whatever end date you want to look up, that can be the time period you look up. So as students go in and repeat activities, this is the question I seem to get the most. Well, students can go back and they can redo a lab as many times as they want. Well, absolutely. They can redo anything in the program that they like for their benefit. But at the same time, instructors say, but I have a deadline, so I want to take the score that meets my deadline date. So this is how you would do that. Now, again, I'm going to take out my date range here so we can see some data. But this will provide me now, for instance, this score that's 80%. If that was the score that was there by the due date, and then the student went back and they redid that particular lab exercise, but they did it after that time period and they got 100%. Well, when you run your report based on this time period you're looking at, you would see the student received an 80% for that exercise, and that's the grade that, of course, you can put in as their, in the gradebook if you are using these for grading purposes. It's not required to use these for grading purposes, but obviously a lot of people like to do that. So I simply wanted to point out that you can, again, use this date range to see what students are doing within a specified period of time. Also, anybody who prefers a point system versus the percentage value that you can see we have here, you can click this box to show scores as a point value instead of that percentage. So at the top now, we provide you with the points possible for each of these different activities, and then you can see what score or point value, in this case, that the student received for that particular activity. So there's a lot of versatility up here in these reports. Okay, let me just do another double check here. Could I have a couple people out there just answer if they're hearing me? I'm having a couple people telling me that they're not hearing me, but I think the audio is working just fine. Perfect. Thank you, Charles. Great. Clarence, thank you. John, perfect. Okay, I thought it was working okay. I think it's maybe their headsets that aren't working correctly, so I appreciate that. And by the way, we are recording this session here, so if for these individuals obviously that aren't hearing, we'll make sure that you get that. Matter of fact, give me a moment here. All right. So the point I was making is that there's a lot of flexibility in looking up report data. So you can adjust any of these parameters at the top that you like. Also, once you've generated a report, if it's information that you would like to keep elsewhere, or maybe you want to import it into your LMS system, in the upper right corner of the reports, we have the little download icon. This will allow you to save this data as a CSV file that you can import elsewhere. And obviously, it's only going to save what you have directly on the screen, not necessarily just in the screen's view, because if you're looking at like the entire gradebook, for instance, then you'll have a scroll bar at the bottom that will allow you to scroll across the screen, but it will take all the data for whatever you've run the report for. So that's the Gradebook report. This is, again, a great snapshot of how the whole class is doing at one time. Let me exit this report, and the second report we're going to review today is the third one on this list, the individual scores by product. This report provides a great resource. If you are looking at the Gradebook and you say, oh, it looks like we have a particular student that's struggling, I want to go in and look up more detail on that individual. Well, this is a perfect report to look at, and this report also provides the most detailed information. So here at the top, it's defaulted to the first student alphabetically in my list. I'm going to look up detail today here on Jimmy. And I'm also going to go ahead and click the boxes to select lessons and videos. Now, obviously, you're probably well aware we do not grade whether a student read a text lesson or watched a video, but we do keep track of the time they're spending in those activities because I know some of you are probably teaching face-to-face, some may be teaching hybrid classes, and then we have some that are purely online. So whatever the case may be, this will give you the detail on how much time students are spending in each of the different activities. And then you can see for the graded items, we have 4 different scores posted. And on the far right, you can also see how many attempts that student made at each of these different activities. So this will provide a great overview again on a specific student. The other thing I like to point out about this particular report is that this also is the same data that the students will see when they look at their score sheet. Obviously, they will only see their own progress, where you can look up anybody in the class, but this is the same report, the same layout and information that they have available in their own personal accounts. So hopefully that means in the long run, there's not a big disparity as far as what students feel like, oh, I think I'm doing really well, and yet their grades are showing opposite. They have the same ability to see how and what they're doing just as easily as instructors do. All right. Now, the other report, I'm not going to go into any detail here, but I simply want to point out that this other report, the certification practice exam scores, will provide you with detail on how the students are doing if you want them doing those practice exams for students that are preparing for a certification test. I know in talking with most college university instructors, I hear, well, we encourage certification. We don't require it. Occasionally I do hear, yeah, it's actually required. Or I've also heard, hey, we don't require it, but if a student gets the certification, then they can automatically get an A in the class. So whatever the case may be, I want to point out that we have the practice exam scores here. Now, I don't have any data on this for this particular class because the class hasn't finished yet. But that's another report that you might be interested in looking at. Obviously, you won't see data until they get to working in that practice questions at the end, but I at least wanted to point this out. Now, we've been talking this whole time about the default reports that are already available for you, that all you do is, click on the title or click run, and the report's automatically generated based on everything, based on specific information from the program itself. Now, you have the ability to create your own custom report. This is a fairly new feature, and this is a great option if there are only specific things in the program you want information returned back on. So for instance, let's go ahead and build a new one. Now, I've already built one here that I have data already populated in for us to look at a little bit later here. But when you first come out here, there won't be anything here, and you'll simply click Add. Now, because I already have a report existing, it says I could use this report and maybe modify it and save that as a different report, or I can go ahead and create manually, which this will be the first step. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Create Manually. For today's demonstration here, I'm simply going to call this My Report. oops, I guess I should name this correctly here. Then I get to choose a variety of different options. First off, this is the product that's being used for the class, so obviously that's what I want to select data from. From here, I can go ahead and select the resources. Now, the resources are those items that are in the course itself. So what are you interested in looking at specifically from the students? Well, typically, the graded activities are what's of most value to instructors, but you may say, you know what, I'm only going to pick from these different topics in this particular course, I'm only going to pick certain activities. So I'm not so concerned here in chapter 1 about their using the simulator lab exercises, but I do want to see how they did, let's say, on this lab, for instance. So when I click the plus sign, that has now added that in, meaning that I'm going to get data back for how students did on that specific activity. And then I can go ahead and click other ones. So if I'm only interested in seeing lab results, of course, I can click whatever lab exercises. And those are, of course, marked with the computer mouse icon, so they are very easy to identify. But maybe maybe there's a topic that doesn't have a lab like this one. So maybe, yeah, in this case, I do want to see the exam results for this particular activity. And of course, I could go through other chapters here. I'm not going to do that today for time's sake here. I could go through other chapters, but I simply can pick out whatever items I want to review. And you can see right now I have 4 items selected here. So I can go ahead and click Done. And I now have the resources selected that I want. For those of you who've created custom exams, you can also get custom exam results on this report now too. This was one function instructors wanted to be able to see how students were doing on the content in the program as well as the custom exam features. So now I could go out and say, yeah, this is the test that I want to see how they did on as well. And I can go ahead now and click the Done button. So now I've added in the portions from LabSim that I want to look up. I've added in a custom exam. Here, the next option is to include certification exams associated with a selected product, so I could even include results from that if I wanted as well. I'm going to leave that unchecked here today. Now notice the next option. This is important. It says choose which students to include in your report, but notice this right here. If unchecked, all students in this class will be included in the report. So again, if you want to see the results for everybody, then again, you don't even have to check the box. It's by default, you'll see everybody. However, if you are running a specific report on a particular individual, well then obviously, if you click this box, now I can choose what students I specifically want to look up in my class. So I could just say, yep, Jimmy's the one I want to look up here, and I could click the box or click the plus sign here for Jimmy. Now in this case, I'm not going to do that, but I simply wanted to show that that is an option. And then down here, I have the other options if I would like to allow students in the class to see their scores using this report that I'm generating. I could check that box. I could allow a teacher for this class to run this report. So if you happen to be an administrator and you have rights to run reports for instructors, then you could check that box so that you were building a report that the other instructors could utilize. They would be able to see that in the report data. And then allow others to create a report based on this custom report. So these are other additional options you have when you're creating these custom reports. And then I can, of course, go ahead and create my report. And the report is now here. Now I know I have data for this report, which is why I created this ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and click Run. And this report, unlike the other ones in LabSim, automatically defaults to a point system. However, again, if you prefer the opposite, the percentage, then you can just click up here at the top to see the percentage option. From here, I can see now this is only giving me, of course, what data I had originally requested to see. So I selected these lab exercises, this particular practice exam, and then this specific custom exam, and I can see how students did on all of these particular items. Now, this would have never been in the data before because custom exam results, if you're familiar with our custom exams, you know they have their own reports under that specific tab, but now they can be included in this area as well as, of course, the certification, which we saw just a minute ago. I didn't select that for this test because I didn't have any students in this particular class that had taken the certification for results. You have these other, obviously, filtering options at the top. Of course, we still have the date range here. You can show the scores also, total time studied, and show the total attempts that were made at each of these, as well as in the scores. Right now, it's defaulting to show the average scores, but you can change this to high, low, or the most recent, or even first scores. We find sometimes instructors say, hey, I don't care how many times you do the activity, but we're going to take your first score as the basis for your grade. Well, if that's the case, then you can look at first scores here only. So again, a lot of data here that you can look at, and as you make any adjustments to the report filtering options, again, that report will automatically update and provide that new or refresh that new information for you. And of course, just like in the other reports that I noted, you do have the download icon here in the upper right that will allow you to save this data as a CSV to import elsewhere. So those are the report options I wanted to cover with you today. I'm not sure how many of you have used our custom report features yet, but this can be a great resource. Again, specifically if you have portions that you want grades returned on, that you don't want to look at everything in chapter 1 or 2 or 3, for instance. There's just portions of that you want to pull out for specifically for your grading purposes. I know I've heard some instructors say, yeah, they just pick a lab from every section that they want to grade on, but they don't tell the students ahead of time which lab it is. And so again, you have a lot of variety in being able to look up report data. So I've covered the topics I wanted to review. I didn't see too many questions during the session here so far, but I do want to open it up now to a specific question and answer period. If anybody has questions on anything I've covered here today as far as reports, I'm happy to address that at this point. So I'm going to see if there's any questions here. Again, of course, do that in the question box for me, please. All right, it looks like there's a question here asking if I could explain the date range again. Absolutely, happy to do that. So the date range filter on any report provides you with the ability to set a time period that you want to look up what students did within that specific time. So if, and this is very useful if you have deadlines that you want students to have assignments turned in by. Let's just take a Friday deadline as an example. If I click on the date range, the start will start. Typically, this just goes in your current month. So it just obviously started at the beginning of August here and is going to the end of August. But I can change either of these dates. I recommend on the start date, just use whatever start date your specific semester or term or whatever it is began. And I'm going to pick, again, the 20th. And then I'm going to say that I had a deadline of that Friday, for instance. The 24th, I had a deadline that assignments were due by that date. So now I want to see, well, what now in this report, again, I won't get any data, just so you know, but I want to see what they did by that Friday date. So this will now show me what they did up till that particular time period. So now if a student went in on Saturday, the 25th, for instance, and they repeated an exercise and they got a better grade, you're not taking the grade from Saturday because you said the assignment was due on Friday, for instance, and you now want to see what grade they got by the end of the day on Friday. So this provides that detail for you. Did that help give you some more information there, Francis? So basically, you can set any time period, but this works great if you have deadlines specifically set up that you want to see data in a particular time period. Great. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, it looks like another question. Is there a chance I can get a link to the previous webinar? Oh, yes, the webinar that we discussed a couple weeks ago, the setup as far as getting your class created. There should be, I believe they just posted it yesterday. If not, I will double check, but there should be a link posted where you signed up originally for these training sessions. Once they are completed, you will be able to find a link there, or maybe there's a button. I'm not even sure how they've located it yet, or set it up, but there should be a link there to click on that you would be able to review these recorded training sessions. Each of these main topics are being recorded so that you can refer back to them at any time. So thank you for that question, Maria. And it looks like there's another question. If I want to create an exam with the chapters that they have covered, how do I do that? So you want to create an exam. Let me go back here to this would, well, you could do that in a couple different ways, actually. The chapters that they've covered, well, obviously you have to know what chapters they've already covered. But if you're looking, let's go back to my default report here and go to the Gradebook just to start us out. If you are looking at what students have done across the board, well, the Gradebook report you can certainly do by chapters. Here you want to see, this says sections, and these are all the sections that would apply to these respective chapters. So if I just want to see how students did in Chapter 1, when I select that here, this will provide me with detail on how they did, of course, on those graded activities, the exams, and the lab exercises. Now, Victor, you're the one that looks like answered or asked, this question. Are you looking specifically at, were you talking specifically about how to create a custom report, or does this report give you the detail that you were looking for as well? Okay, and you said, yes, it does, and I need to ask questions from those chapters. Um, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but this brings me to one other point that I want to bring up, certainly before we close here today, that if you have questions outside of what we've already discussed, or maybe you have additional questions from what we've talked about today, we've gone through our half-hour time period here, and again, thank you guys so much for attending today. I appreciate you joining this training session. Hopefully, this has been helpful. But if you do have other questions, whether it's something we've discussed here today, previously, or anything about LabSim, I'm certainly happy to help out. So feel free to contact me at any point in time. Thank you guys so much for attending today. I appreciate your time, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.